have this emphasis of development economics to use randomized controlled trials to analyze what works and what doesn't. And Justin talked about this in the morning. So just a couple of examples, and Justin gave many more this morning of how randomized controlled trials are used to assess a certain intervention. There are a couple of challenges. Justin talked about external validity, so we'll not go into that. Other challenges are, they're related to external validity. Justin did not really go pretty much into that, very deep into that in the morning, are general equilibrium effects and scaling up effects. So if you have a study that gives, fertilizer to some poor farmers, a treatment group, and not to a control group, and you compare what is the impact of this fertilizer on agricultural production, you have a small experiment and you find that fertilizer increases production, okay? But what happens if you would implement that program on a large scale? What if we would give fertilizer to all the farmers in the country? What would happen is, okay, maybe output would increase initially. What may happen is that agricultural prices go down because of the supply effect. And in the end, you do not have, in the end, if agricultural prices decrease, you give a disincentive to farmers to produce. So if you implement fertilizer subsidies on a large scale, the effect of the program may be very different from what a small randomized controlled trial may suggest. So this is all linked to general equilibrium effects and scaling up effects. So we don't know very well what happens if we would scale up a small pilot program to a larger scale. The reason why we don't know well what happens if we scale up a small pilot program to a larger scale is because we don't know what are the general equilibrium effects triggered by the program if you increase the penetration of the program. So what I'm asking here is if we can address some of these challenges, external validity, scaling up, general equilibrium effects, if we analyze this experimental data within a behavioral general equilibrium model. So the idea is to analyze experimental data within a structural general equilibrium model. And so what I'm doing is I'm using the well-known oportunidades randomized controlled trial. So with the audience, I don't have to explain that much how that works. So there were in Mexico, there is Progress Oportunidades, which is a cash transfer program. So some people, some poor rural households receive a cash benefit, conditional on sending their kids to school and so forth. In order to evaluate the effect of this program, the Mexican government conducted a randomized controlled trial. So 506 villages were randomized into treatment villages, so 320 treatment villages and 186 control villages. And within these villages, you have poor households and non-poor households. So poor households were classified by the Mexican government according to some statistical method. Whoever qualifies as poor would receive, here in the treatment villages, whoever qualifies as poor would receive quite a substantial cash transfer by the Mexican government. And the non-poor households would not receive it. And so the poor houses and control villages would also not receive a cash transfer. So the only one who receives a cash transfer here in this experimental design are the poor in treatment villages. So this has, this experimental design, this very nice experimental design jointly with a very comprehensive data collection that has been conducted in these 506 villages, has really generated lots of studies on this program, on Oportunidades Progressa. So I classify these studies into conventional, unconventional, conventional, and conventional. So what I classify as conventional conventional studies of this program are studies which simply compare the poor in treatment villages with the poor in control villages. Compare difference, that gives you the so-called average treatment effect. So we compare consumption, average consumption of households, of poor households in treatment villages with consumption of poor households in control villages. And that difference is attributed to the problem. So you have gazillions of studies. If you do a Google Scholar, Oportunidades, Impact, you will see lots of papers comparing some outcome of interest, being it schooling, being it consumption, being it whatever we can think of poor households in treatment with that of control villages. So that's why I labeled these studies here conventional. Then you have studies that are labeled as unconventional conventional. They're conventional in the sense that they also compare simply means in treatment and control group. But here this one, unfortunately, Georgia is unconventional because it looks not at the recipients of cash transfers, but at non-recipients living in the same village. So they're looking at spillover effects that happen. So in the village, poor households and non-poor households, suddenly there comes a program, a cash transfer program, which is cash to the poor houses in that village. So how are non-poor houses affected by the fact that there's a program coming to the village? And what they find is that non-poor households in treatment villages have much higher food consumption than non-poor households in control villages, suggesting that the program somehow generates spillover effects on non-poor households living in the same village. What they hypothesize is that this mechanism is sort of an insurance mechanism. So I'm a cash transfer recipient and I share some of the cash transfer with my extended family, with my aunt and uncle, who may happen not to be a cash recipient, who may happen not to be beneficial of the program. So cash transfer recipients share part of the benefit with non-recipients. That's the story in that paper of Angelucci in Georgia. And then there are studies which are labeled as unconventional. Unconventional in the sense that these studies are taught in Volpin and Atanasio, Passi, and Ana Santiago. Ana Santiago? No? And Ana Santiago, actually, the last paper, very nice paper, who analyzed this Oportunidades program within a structural economic model. And what they, by analyzing Oportunidades within a structural model, they were able to tease out some effects or do an impact evaluation that you would not be able to do when you just compare treatment and control groups. And my paper here goes into that last part, falls into the last category. So I'm analyzing Oportunidades within a structural model. But unlike Todd and Volpin and Atanasio, my model is much simpler than these models. It's not dynamic, it ignores fertility choices, but it puts strong emphasis on general equilibrium effects in the local economy. So my model incorporates potential general equilibrium effects triggered by the cash transfer program. And so analyzing this program, Progressa, within a structural, local general equilibrium framework yields some new insights. So what I'm able to do, for example, is I make a distinction between a direct, for the beneficiaries, and we're talking about the cash transfer recipients, I make a distinction between a direct and an indirect effect. So the direct effect is, when I give you cash here, I give you cash. If you will spend that cash on consumption, for example, how much does the consumption increase? That's a direct effect. There is no general equilibrium effect involved. Because I give you 100 pesos, 2 soles. If you spend 20 soles of that 100 soles, so your direct effect of the program will be 20 soles on consumption. So there's no general equilibrium effect. It's a simple partial equilibrium effect that you catch what is the impact on consumption. And then the indirect effect is how does your behavior change because the local general equilibrium of the economy changes. So this cash transfer program changes local price and wages. So on top of that partial equilibrium effect I just mentioned, we have another effect which is change in price and wages, which will again affect the impact of the problem. The price, for example, go up because of the demand shock. Then you may not spend the 20 of the 100 that I gave her, but maybe only 15. So the direct effect, which is 20, in a sense, and an indirect effect, which is -5. And that leads me also to shed light a bit on the local context. So analyzing the progressor within this model allows me to study how does the effect change when the local context changes, how does market integration affect treatment effects, how do other variables like agricultural productivity, for example, affect treatment effects. So it allows me to explore a bit the external validity of treatment effects. It allows me also to look at scaling up effects. What would happen if we would increase the share of beneficiaries in the village? How would this affect the average effect of the program? And it allows me to explore a bit long-term versus compare long-term effects with short-term effects. Because they as well may differ effect, short-term and long-term. And for ineligible households, for these non-poor households that are living in the same community as beneficiaries, I provide a different explanation for this result that Angelucci and Giorgi finds that consumption of these households goes up. I argue that general equilibrium effects are as well very likely to generate these consumption spillover effects on ineligible households living in the same community. And also the structural analysis unveils some heterogeneity in the spillover effect. So Angelucci and Giorgi, for example, show that consumption of these households goes up, food consumption of these non-poor households goes up. And the model allows me to explore what is the heterogeneity in this average effect, in this average spillover. What I find, for example, is that small houses, so houses which have low in and outs, they are very likely to be adversely affected. Their consumption is likely to decrease as a consequence of the program. Okay, the model. I didn't have the time to run through all the equations, and I did that before in the presentations, and I saw people napping away. And not make that mistake again. So I try a different approach, some sort of some circles and arrows. So think of the model as some sort of arrow Debreu model. So this here is a village. This is a village, and within this village you have poor households and rich households. Of course, in fact, they're not as rich in the context of rural Mexico. So even those households who are not receiving the progressor cash benefit, and they're not rich in absolute terms, rich relative to the poor in the same village. And so these households maximize utility function in food, non-food, and leisure. Why this distinction? And this distinction is non-standard. This distinction between food and non-food consumption. I will show that this distinction is absolutely crucial when you think about consumption effects of cash transfers. What I will show later is, for example, for the non-poor households, what I will show is that food consumption is very likely to increase because of the cash transfer program in the village, whereas non-food consumption is very likely to decrease. And at the same time, for the beneficiaries, I will show that this general equilibrium effect is that increases the average treatment effect on food consumption, but decreases the average effect on non-food consumption. So this distinction is very crucial between food and non-food consumption. So what is food and non-food consumption? I mean, when I think of food consumption, I think about the staples that are produced locally. And with non-food consumption, I label here stuff that comes from outside the village. That could be. And actually, if you look at household data in these rural areas, you will see that a large share, more than 50% of consumption in these villages are non-food items, such as batteries, soap, washing we need for hygiene, washing stuff, vitamins, and all these things, toothbrushes, toothpaste. So a really large share of consumption in these villages is not produced locally, it comes from outside. So the model takes into account these directions of trade flows, that the village exports food, exports staples, in this case corn, and imports non-food items. And this has, thinking about that recognizing this different direction of local trade flows will influence how the cash transfer program affects food consumption and non-food consumption. So, okay, so we maximize this utility function, food, non-food, and leisure, subject to a budget constraint. For the poor households, this budget constraint includes cash transfer by the Mexican government. That gives you demand functions for food, non-food, and labor supply function as functions of the endowments of the household, as function of the price vector, other parameters of the model, theta, and the progressive cash transfer.
So you treat the transfer as a separate income, or
yes, the transfer is a separate income. It's a cash transfer. And so I ignore here in this model, I ignore the conditionalities that come with progressive, although I discussed the implications of including them in the paper.
But then why is it separate? We don't take into account the money.
Well, there are many people who say that these cash transfers are de facto unconditional because of the poor capacity of governments to monitor these conditionalities. So basically, the notion is that these conditional cash transfers are de facto unconditional. There's just not the capacity to monitor if children are attending school. But it would be very easy to include this condition simply by creating a link between this transfer and the labor endowment of the household. So you could simply include a link where once the transfer goes up, labor endowment goes down, reflecting that the household has to send children to school. So that would be easy to, technically it's easy to include it. And in fact the reference wants me to include it, so I will work on it. So that's that. So important is here, oops. Important is this price vector. Important is this price vector. So how does this price vector look like? So what is the price of food items? What is the price of food items? Think about it. Think about the Cobb-Douglas demand function. How does the Cobb-Douglas demand function look like? Like if for food, you would have your income, here full income, here the Cobb-Douglas production, Cobb-Douglas utility preference parameter, and divided by the price of food. And the same thing for non-food. You would have a demand function, beta, full income, over the price of non-food. So now recognizing the difference in the trade flows will become crucial. So for food, what is happening? So how do I model this food price? So the food price of food consists of an exogenous component. Food exogenous. That is the world market price of food plus an endogenous component. What is this endogenous component? It's the cost of labor. Oops. Minus, of course. Minus the cost of labor that you need to produce, to sell, to export your staple. Let's think of it as transaction costs to sell your staple. And this is of course negative because there's a world market price, but then you have transaction costs. And you have to travel to the next market, whatever, to get that price. So you have a minus here, minus of this the labor costs that exists to export the staple. But then for food, it's exactly the opposite. For non-food, sorry. For non-food, it's exactly the opposite. For non-food, think of a soap bar. There's a soap bar, and so the soap bar comes from Mexico City. So you have this exogenous price of the soap bar in Mexico City, plus what is the village price of the soap bar? It is the price that it costs in Mexico City, plus the labor costs.
So I know all of the non-food items trade on the good?
Yes. And so the important thing is to recognize the difference here in these endogenous
But
components.
is that doing the data or is it something?
What exactly?
They are not services consumed by the farm.
There are no services consumed. But you could think of the non-food goods as a service. Now think of here this P. Think of a barber service. So this would be the price here of the scissor. The scissor that the barber uses. And this would be the price of the labor. You need to produce a service. So the non-food can be interpreted as a service.
Okay, I understood that BR was the transaction, the price of the labor to transport the multiplied the price of the labor to produce.
I'm not restricted to say this is the transfer cost. It could also be the wage, labor cost to produce the service. So we have that. So what happens? What happens now if wages go up? If wages go up, let's just assume, and we'll discuss that in a second. Let's assume wages, local wages go up. What will happen with food prices? They'll go down. What will happen with non-food prices? They'll go up. So this is very important. So why would you know? So what is happening? So you have this. So you have this demand functions, and then you have the local labor market equilibrium, the village level, where the labor market must clear. So demand for labor must equal supply. Of course, so what is happening here? If demand for food and non-food goes up, because of this link here with labor, automatically demand for labor goes up. If people have more cash, they want to consume more hygiene products, for example, more soap, or they want to wash more. So there's a labor involvement, some labor cost involved in getting that stuff to the village, or to produce that stuff locally at the village. You think of a barber service. So that labor market equilibrium determines the village price, which is a function of the endowments, all the other parameters of the model, the number of households that receive the cash transfer and the transfer size itself. And you can plug that back, that equilibrium price, that equilibrium wage, you can plug that back into the demand functions here, and also here for the non-poor households. And derive that with respect to the progressive transfer, and you get your theoretical treatment effects. And also now for this for the rich houses, because once you substitute here this price, this wage, into the price vector for the rich households, this price vector, this wage, is a function of progressive. So suddenly the rich households, the impact there is an impact on the rich households, even though they do not receive the cash transfer, but via changes in local prices. So what is happening? So this is the expression for the analytical expression for the equilibrium wage, and what you can show is that when the cash transfer comes, then wages go up. So there's this income effect. But then which implies by that link here, with non-food prices, that implies that if wages go up, non-food prices will go up. And if you assume that food is sold at the farm gate, which is quite common in Mexico, if you assume that food is sold at the farm gate, so that no transaction costs are then for exporting food, then of course this wage component eventually becomes very tiny. So if I assume farm gate selling, for example, you may assume that the food prices are exogenous. Then you only have a price, we only have a price effect on non-food prices, but not on food prices. If we assume farm gate selling of agricultural products. So then, so what are the theoretical effects then? What could happen? So for food consumption, I'm not sure if you see that back there. Do you see that? This table, no? Set up. So, what is the sign of the treatment effect? So for the poor households, so those that receive the cash transfer, the effect on food consumption will always be positive. Simply because there's this income effect, on my wages, and of course from the cash transfer. There's no price effect on food items. There's no price effect on food items. So it's just an income effect which makes food consumption of poor households to increase. That's what has been found in many studies, of course. Then for rich households, but non-poor households, the effect on food consumption will always be positive. Because there is the income effect, the wage effect, in the absence of a price effect on food, so that will also generate food consumption of non-poor households to go up, which is exactly the finding of Angelo Di Giorgi.
But the price effect will also inform the effect
on agricultural. Well, there's nothing happening. It's exogenous.
No, right, but that's because now you made that assumption. I'm saying if you don't make that assumption, it's still will go in the same way.
Yeah.
So why do you make that assumption? Otherwise, I decide. It's not clear to me whether you decide then that you don't include.
It is a replicating the stylized facts that we don't observe food prices change in these villages, which you can rationalize with this common trend, this common phenomenon in Mexico, this common date sell, which implies no transactions. But then, so here down, there is the effect on non-food consumption. So non-food consumption, the effect is a priori ambiguous. So you have an income effect, which signifies increases your demand for non-food items, but then there's the price effect. As wages go up, prices of non-food items go up. So it will depend if the income effect outweighs the price effect, if or not the treatment effect is positive or negative. And this is particularly relevant here for the non-poor households. So the non-poor households, okay, they have this income effect from high wages, but then non-food prices go up. So it's unclear a priori if non-food consumption of non-poor households increases or decreases. It will depend if the income effect outweighs the price effect or not. And, I will show that this is not the case. I will bring evidence that non-food consumption of non-poor households really decreased. Food consumption of non-poor households, yes, decreased, but with a structural model I will estimate later, I will show that utility of the average non-poor household actually decreased, because the decrease in non-food consumption is higher than the increase in food consumption. So overall, the effect on non-poor households' utility will be negative. So that was the effect by the form. So, okay, so empirical evidence. So let's first look at the income, at the commodity price effects. So Angelo and Di Giorgi have shown that food prices were not affected. Then the problem is that when we want to talk about non-food prices, that they're not observed from the data. They're not observed, so we cannot check whether non-food prices are different in treatment and control villages. So what I do is here, I attempt to gauge the effect on non-food prices. I estimate the effect on non-food expenditure at the expensive margin. As I create a dummy, if a non-poor household has positive expenditure, non-food expenditure or not, so that's a dummy 1,0, then I compare this dummy in treatment and control villages. So I compare the probability that a non-poor household has 0 non-food expenditure in treatment and control villages. And what we see here is that indeed the probability that households have 0 non-food expenditure goes up. Or in phrase in this way, there's a lower probability that non-poor households have positive non-food consumption expenditure. But there are some households, or a couple of households, who apparently reduce their non-food expenditure from positive to 0, which may be interpreted as reflecting this price effect on non-food items.
What can be
Why? Well, we know that income goes up. That's what I will show later. That income, if there's an income effect. So there's, go to the next one here.
Right, so if the income goes up, it can be income.
Why, if your income goes up, why would you reduce your non-food expenditure to zero? You would demand more.
Oh, I understand. I put something in the I know you use it probably not
so here, one, it takes the value 1 if non-food expenditure is positive, and 0 if not. So this suggests that there was a decrease in non-food expenditure at the extensive margin. So some non-poor households in treatment villages reduced their non-food expenditure from positive to 0. And here's the income effect. So if you look at local wages, the local wage proxy that I'm constructing here, you see a positive effect on local wages. So there's an income effect. There's an income effect, which I mentioned before. There's no price effect on food items. There's no price effect on food items, but apparently there seems to be a price effect on non-food items. Okay. Okay, so then the question is, okay, so we remember that in the model, so we have in the model, we said that the effect on food consumption is unambiguous, while the effect on non-food consumption is ambiguous. So again, the issue is that when I want to, when I don't observe non-food quantities from the data, I don't observe non-food expenditure. The problem is I cannot compare non-food expenditure. Compare non-food expenditure to treatment control. It just doesn't tell me anything about consumption, about quantities, because I cannot observe prices. So I cannot compare expenditures in treatment control villages. They simply reflect changes in prices and not changes in quantities. So in order to shed light on what happened to consumed non-food quantities, I estimate these quantities in a structural manner. So I take my model, I calibrate my model to the control villages, calibrate the parameters of my model to the control villages. Then I do some checks if the model replicates well the outcomes of the control villages, of the treatment villages. So here you see, for example, food consumption. You see you see what we observe. In the control group here, that's the mean peso per month. Food consumption, peso value, 756 peso. And that's what we observe as an average for the non-poor households in control villages. So my model predicts 731, so it's not too far off of what we observe in reality. And also, if you look at the treatment group, so if I simulate with my model the program, and then look how food consumption changes of these eligible households, I find an effect of 3.9% increase in food consumption, of non-poor households, which compares to 1.9% when we compare non-poor households in treatment and control villages on the actual experimental data. So the model is able to replicate quite well what we observe in reality, which then increases my confidence in divided model estimated quantities, non-food quantities. And when I do that, I observe, so my structural estimations tell me that non-food consumption decreases in these non-poor households. If I use the model to estimate the effect on utility, I find that there's a decrease in utility for these non-poor households. Okay, so food consumption goes up, it's fine, but non-food consumption goes down, and it seems that the effect, since there's a very high preference for non-food items, it seems that the decrease in non-food consumption outweighs the increase in food consumption, so that overall the effect on utility is negative for these non-poor households. So which I think is interesting. I mean, there's all these sorts of issues with the model. That the model is very simple, and all that, and maybe it may not reflect the reality on the ground. But I think that this encourages researchers to do some more research on these spillover effects. There's this anecdotal things that these cash transfer programs generate large local multiplier effects. And so we have this notion that major multipliers that work when you inject money into a poor community. My results do not look at welfare, utility. My results do not suggest that. It seems that utility of non-poor houses goes down, and so we're, at least according to my estimations, adversely affected. I have more, but I don't have time. We can use the model to estimate or to do some comparative statistics and to look at some heterogeneous effects. Or, for example, what you can show is that the effect of the cash transfer program on non-poor households, non-food consumption, is positive if the labor endowment of the household is sufficiently large, which is intuitive because the larger the labor endowment of the household, the larger is the wage effect for this household. Or you can phrase it the other way around: the smaller the household, the more likely the household is adversely affected by the program. And so if I do some interaction effects here with the experimental data, this is exactly what you find. You have non-food consumption, non-food expenditure, to see that per capita, it's a dependent variable, it's non-food consumption per capita. You see that in small households here, which is below median household size, there is a negative effect. Below median. Or it's at least it's low. If you take two together, it goes towards 0. 23 minus 17. So the effect is definitely lower for small. So the effect on expenditure is lower for small households. So small households again have a larger probability to be adversely affected by the cash transfer program. And then this is my last slide. There was something curious that happened between October 98 and March 99 in these villages. The Mexican government adjusted the eligibility threshold. So initially, here in October 98, about 50% of the village was receiving cash benefits. So half the village was receiving cash benefits. Then the Mexican government changed this rule, relaxed eligibility requirements, so that suddenly 80% of the village would receive the cash transfer. And so the share of beneficiaries went up between October 98 and March 99, went up by almost 30%. So you may ask, how did this affect? How does the increase in additional beneficiaries affected those beneficiaries who were already in the program before it scaled? There was an average treatment effect before the scale, so you have these old beneficiaries, and they receive these cash transfers. Suddenly I include all the other guys here on the right-hand side. So you were the old guys who received cash transfers before that already, so now we include all these guys. How does this affect the treatment effect that we observe here? And so what happens here, this is quite stunning, although it's just indicative, there's no random variation here. There's no random variation here, but the model rationalizes that. You see that, so you guys here who received the cash transfer before, let's start with food consumption. So the treatment effect, food consumption goes up from 26 to 67. There's a huge explosion of treatment effects between the two data waves. The same thing happens here for non-food expenditure. Even though, careful here with non-food expenditure, we're not sure if this is what is the quantity. Quantities behind it. But you see just the explosion in treatment effects of beneficiaries that were receiving benefits already before the inclusion of the new guys. And the model rationalizes that. So if I would, in my model, if I would include these people here into the program, what would happen? Wages go up, wages would go up. So we have an income effect, which explains why food prices are not affected, which explains why suddenly your treatment effect goes up, which reflects the income effect from including these guys. Whereas for non-food consumption, it's not as clear, so you have this income effect, but at the same time, non-food prices will go up. So it's not clear if this increase reflects simply the fact that you have to spend more on your non-food items.
Okay.